of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Camaro, would you please call the roll when you're ready?
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Hale?
Here.
Vice Chair Pont?
Here.
Chair Hardy?
Here. That brings us to the public forum section of the agenda. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the commission on items that are not on our agenda, which has the ironic consequence of meaning we can't speak to them, but there you have it. If there's anyone who would like to speak on a matter not on our agenda, this is your time to come forward. Seeing none, we'll move on to consent items. Members of the commission or the public may request that anything on our consent calendar be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Are there any items that a member of the commission would like removed?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to
Microphone.
pull 4.2.
Your mic isn't on.
I'd like to pull 4.2 if we could, please.
Very good. And as there are only 2 items on the consent calendar, that leaves us with approval of minutes. Is there anyone who wishes to pull the minutes?
Go for
Any
it.
member of the public who would like to pull the minutes from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a
Move.
motion for the remaining consent
We
item.
would like to move the remaining items on the consent calendar.
Second.
Ms. Gamaro?
Vice Chair Pont?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Hale?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
And Chair Hardy?
Yes. So that brings us to item 4.2. It appears, Mr. Biddle, that this is yours to present. Please, tell us about it.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Mike Biddle. I'm a partner with the firm of Burke, Williams & Sorensen, serves as the city attorney for the city of St. Helena. And the proposed ordinance that's being presented to you tonight for recommendation to the City Council is directed to you at the request of the Council. And the intent of the ordinance is to provide the City Council the ability to consider the refund of defense costs that a project applicant might pay on behalf of the city for certain discrete projects. And as I'll explain, sort of the world of those projects that might be eligible under this ordinance for a refund, as it were, is relatively narrow. So the sort of the first set of defining characteristics in order to be eligible for a refund requires that the project be a residential project. So it would only apply to residential projects. It would be a residential project that has and complies with the affordability components that are in the city's municipal code. And it's a residential project with affordability component that is located in a zoning district in which residential development is permitted. So if it's in a district that it is conditionally permitted, then that type of project is not eligible under this ordinance for a potential refund of defense costs on an appeal. So that's sort of the first set of parameters. There is also another aspect that the project application, and this is meant to address the desire of the council that this proposed ordinance have some retroactive effects. So the proposed application would have to have been filed with the city on or after January 1st of 2016. So it's not intended to apply back further beyond the 1st of January in 2016. So that's sort of the initial world of projects that this would apply to. So now a project application comes into the city's planning department. The planning department presents that application to the planning commission. The planning commission presumably approves that project. A interested party raises issues of concern with the commission that presumably have not been addressed to their satisfaction, and so they file an appeal of that application to the city council. The city council then considers the application on appeal and upholds the planning commission's decision and approves that project. So now the project has been approved by the city, and the concerned parties who had raised concerns, they now have an opportunity, should they so choose, to file a lawsuit to challenge the city's actions. Yes, Chair.
Just like to interrupt with a quick question here. Does this apply just the same if the planning commission denies or recommends denial, but the council approves on appeal?
Yeah, it would.
Thank you.
Correct. I was just, fair enough, just playing it out.
Just for clarity's sake.
Very good, thank you. And so now the application has been approved by the city. Concerned parties file a lawsuit in Napa Superior Court. They are deemed the plaintiffs or petitioners. They follow what's called a petition for writ of mandate. And the city and the initial project applicant, they are the defendants in that proceeding, and the city is referred to as the respondent, and the real party, or the applicant rather, is referred to as a real party in interest. The city's conditions of approval, and certainly it's part of the project application that the applicant will sign, obligates them to defend, indemnify, hold the city harmless from costs and fees incurred by the city in connection with processing that application. So at this petition stage that is in the trial court of Napa County Superior Court, the project applicant is obligated to not only should they want to pursue their project, they are the ones that are compelled to defend it, and they're obligated to pay certainly whatever legal fees for attorneys that they may secure to defend them, but also they're obligated to pay for the city's costs at that trial court setting. To be clear, these costs that are incurred at the trial court are not part of what is being considered in this ordinance. So the project applicant is still obligated to pay for those costs that are incurred at the trial court. Now, should the trial court overturn the city's decision, say, city, you got it all wrong, and upholds the petition of the concerned citizens, then end of story. This ordinance has no application to that situation, even if the applicant were to then subsequently appeal that trial court decision and have that trial court decision reversed in their favor. So there needs to be an initial trial court decision upholding the city's decision to approve this project. Okay? And so if you have that scenario, then so the trial court is uphold the city's decision. If the concerned citizens party, plaintiff petitioner, if they choose not to appeal that trial court decision, end of story, this ordinance has no application in that setting. If the concerned parties actually file an appeal, then that starts to trigger some pieces of this ordinance. The project applicant would be obligated to essentially file their application with the city to potentially get reimbursement of the costs that they are going to start to incur in defense of the appeal. Okay, now we're at the Court of Appeal setting, all right? And so there's going to be costs at that stage. So they file this application with the city. They have to file it within 30 days of the notice of appeal having been filed. And that notice of appeal is provided to the city attorneys and the finance director so that those departments can start to separately account for the costs, the legal costs of the city that are being incurred going forward from that point. So now you have a proceeding before the Court of Appeal. If the Court of Appeal upholds that decision of the trial court, upholding the city's approval of the project, then we can now consider a reimbursement. If, however, the trial or the Court of Appeal, overturns the city's decision, then again has no. This ordinance will have no application. So again, we've got a city council decision upholding the project, you've got a trial court decision upholding the project, and you've got a Court of Appeal decision upholding the project. That sort of set of circumstances has to be in play before this application now can be considered by the city council. So once we get a decision back from the Court of Appeal, it's referred to as a remitter. That decision gets sent back to the trial court, and everything's done. So that's sort of the end of the case for the most part. Once that remitter is issued, then we would schedule a hearing before the city council for them to consider the application for reimbursement of the costs on appeal. And as part of that report that would go to the city council, the city attorney and the finance director would itemize the expenses, the costs that had been incurred by the city, but still they are still being paid. As I should confirm for you, is that these defense costs during the appeal are still being paid by the applicant. So, but we are tracking what they are. And so at a hearing before the city council, they have the opportunity to consider whether they wish to approve a reimbursement of some or all of those costs on appeal. If they choose to do so, since it's not something that would have been budgeted, this is not an ongoing line item in the city's budget. They would have to appropriate and allocate money for that as part of that approval. And so now you have the council saying, okay, there were $50,000 spent on the appeal, and we're going to agree to reimburse you, let's say, all of it, 50. So 50 is what the city council has authorized. Now, in order for that applicant to actually receive the money, they have to, because part of the intent of the council is that we're trying to support affordable housing in areas that we want to see it. And so you, project applicant, you will not receive any of this money until you actually build those units. So the ordinance provides that the reimbursement will get paid upon issuance of an occupancy permit by the city's building department, essentially, once those units are completed in the amount that the city had previously approved. That's pretty much what it does.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Any questions for the city attorney?
I have a couple, but if you would like to go first. The first one is, if all the conditions that you have read are met and the city council still denies the payment, is the city at risk at all for a lawsuit at that point?
No, this is purely a discretionary decision on the part of the council to allocate monies that it has no obligation to do so. It's
Okay.
purely something within its discretion.
Now, the people who appealed in the beginning and the people who are appealing the decision, if the appellate court upholds or the trial court upholds the city's decision to approve the appeal, and the appellate court does too, are the people who are appealing liable for all of the costs, for court costs for the city and for the applicant and for themselves, or
there is an opportunity for sometimes the Court of Appeal will award what are called costs, which are different from attorney fees. So there is a possibility that the Court of Appeal could award costs on appeal. Those are usually relatively very minor. They're like filing fees. There's generally, we're talking fees that are in the range of maybe a couple $1,000s.
So the appellant would not be liable would not be required to pay anybody's lawyer fees except for their own, except possibly these fees that you're talking
The
about.
appellant, when you say the appellant.
The person who originally
She means the
challenged-
petitioner.
The petitioner.
Petitioner,
Okay.
my bad. Okay.
Fair enough.
Yes, the petitioner. So the petitioner will only be even if the appellate court upholds the city's decision, the petitioner will only be liable for their own attorney fees and perhaps some costs that you said were minor. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
it's usually on occasion the court will award, as I say, they will award costs. In these types of proceedings, it's rare to see them ever award attorney's fees.
But they could.
I'm not sure on what. Usually they have to find there has to be some contractual or some statutory basis for the court to award attorney fees. And I'm not aware of anything that in the code, and certainly the city and the applicant would not be in contract with somebody who's challenging the project. So there's nothing that I'm aware of in the statutes that authorize the city or a project applicant in this case to recover their attorney's fees if they're successful in defending a challenge on a project. So I'm not aware.
Okay, and they also would not be required to pay anything to the city. The petitioner.
The petitioner, no. I mean, at that stage, the city really has no out-of-pocket costs because the project applicant is paying everything.
Right, but
Right.
if it is decided that the city will reimburse the applicant, would the petitioner be liable to pay the city back anything, or the?
No, we would have. There's no statute contract that the city has between it and the party who's filed the challenge to the project.
Okay, so it's not going to put the petitioner at risk for
No.
huge expenses. Okay, thank you.
John?
A couple things. One, I noticed in the staff report that we're waiting for a Department of Industrial Relations ruling. Is there any way that we can shield ourselves in what you've currently written in case the DIR comes out against us?
Well,
Or is that something we have to follow up with?
all the DIR was asked to do was to opine whether adoption of an ordinance like this would be whether it would run afoul of prevailing wage laws.
I understand that, but you don't want to have to pay prevailing wage if you don't have to, particularly in the Bay Area.
I'm quite aware of that. But my view of the request of the DIR is that you're likely not to get a response from them because the city's letter essentially was asking it to opine on essentially whether adoption of a certain city policy would shield projects from prevailing wages, and I just can't imagine that the Department of Industrial Relationship is going to weigh in on that. Their primary function in the way they operate is that they take specific facts from specific situations and they analyze those facts in that situation and provide an opinion as to whether there is or isn't a requirement that a project pay prevailing wages. This ordinance does not, one, it doesn't provide that the city will or will not pay for any portion of it. And so I can't see how this ordinance would necessarily cause any problems for any project, residential project, affordable, as a result of this ordinance.
So essentially you're saying we don't have anything to worry about on that
I don't
case.
believe so, no.
Okay. Second thing, REMF doesn't cover us for any land use related costs, decisions based on that.
Which doesn't? I'm sorry?
REMF, Redwood Empire Municipal Insurance
the
Fund.
city's insurance authority.
Right,
correct.
right. I'm just wondering if this proposed ruling would have any effect on our insurance through REMF.
I can't imagine why it would. I mean, certainly cities, in many instances, this is something that's well within the discretion of the city. The city makes...
That's not the point. Right now, we're not covered for any of these costs, okay? If the city pays off through this, is there a potential reimbursement from REMF, or is it simply sunk costs? It's gone.
It would not be a cost that I'm aware of that the city would be able to get through its insurance company.
Okay, it's a
would come
joint
out-
insurance company. It's cities and counties together.
I understand. And essentially, it would be funds that would primarily probably come out of the city's general fund or some other fund that would be appropriate for payment of fees related to a housing development.
Okay, so you believe, without checking with REMF, that there's no way we could dance this around, so we could get a reimbursement for it.
I mean, it doesn't.
Okay.
They don't cover
Um,
those sorts of costs, even if you didn't have a project applicant, indemnifying you.
Okay. And none of this covers any project for regulatory action. In other words, if we have a case in front of the PUC, for example.
No,
Okay,
I can't imagine what sort of PUC case this. Again, this is related to.
Because we've got lots of railroad right-of-way in town?
No, it relates to projects that the city might approve that are residential, that have an affordability component, and they're in a zoning district that permits residential development.
Which could be on railroad right-of-way.
Well, I don't know of many projects that can be constructed on active railroad right-of-way before they are actually abandoned and acquired for private use.
I think we have one of those in town.
Well, it's on railroad property. It's not on a right-of-way per se.
Right. Well, it's on railroad right-of-way. They own it. And as
which
part of their-
means it's
and-
really not a right-of-way. So the wine train develops land that's surplus to the operation.
Right.
It's not a separate parcel. One of the ways they got away with it is because they said, well, we have 10,000 feet of parking.
No, I
You know.
know that history.
Okay, okay. Last thing, I would kind of appreciate it if the clarity on the city's ability to pay less in the whole amount were beefed up. The way it reads right now, to the applicant in accordance with subsection G below, a fixed sum is determined by the city council not to exceed the defense costs on appeal. I would kind of like it clarified that the fixed amount could be 0 up to the full amount of the city's defense costs on appeal.
Well, certainly the amount that the council would be considering to approve could be anywhere from 0 to the full amount.
I'm just reading the ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
It's
What do I do with my pen?
1708-200 F. You've got a not to exceed, but you don't seem to have a lower limit.
Well, if that's a question about what it says, this would be the time to address it. But if
Well, certainly
you're interested in
certainly
making a
zero would not exceed the
recommendation for a
city's.
change, I think that's better
Comes
addressed
later,
when
yeah.
we close the public hearing and deliberate.
Fine. I'm
I had-
certainly not interested in standing.
But I have a
away this.
note.
I had
We
a
won't forget.
one more question. Can I put in one question? It's a short
You've
question.
had one bite at the apple, so let's see if Dan
Okay, if
or
they're done,
Autumn
yeah.
have any questions
Okay,
first,
of course,
please.
yeah.
Autumn? Dan?
Yeah, I have a quick, I mean, I looking through this, I think I understand this ordinance was created as a sort of, or an avenue for possible relief for the McGrath project, that the city wants to support things like that happening, you know, where the McGrath project kind of fell prey to unintended outlay of costs. Has the city council or your group considered kind of changing the conditions that required them as the applicant to be kind of held perpetually hostage to this kind of outcome? I mean, because it seems to me the dynamic that was set up when they agreed to those conditions, thinking, of course, that they wouldn't happen. You know, I think it's kind of a perverse condition that an applicant applies before this group, gets approved, some outside entity, you know, throws barrage after barrage of, and keeps feeding it up the line, and they are on the hook perpetually. I would rather see us remove that condition and have the city stand by its decisions and be responsible for that. As opposed to, you know, and I applaud this instance of relief. I think it's valid, but I just want, my question is, was that considered as of, you know, as a route?
Well, that has not been the direction I've been provided. So, and I can say that in my experience, that's generally not the way that cities handle these. The project applicant is going to be the one who's going to be responsible for the cost, because it's their project. They're coming through the city.
Right, but
for their approvals.
Right, but they paid their fees in good faith. And
I understand.
And those decisions were rendered, you know, in good faith too, but with no, you know, I guess I resent a little bit the situations where we as a city we're never responsible for, you know, backing up our decisions. You know,
Dan, I understand your concern, having represented applicants for decades, but I don't think this agenda item is really a good opportunity for discussing the indemnification requirement.
Okay.
It's not what's in front of us, and
Right.
really, if we have concerns about that, collectively or individually, that's best raised at a joint meeting with the council. In my opinion. Bobby, you had another
Yes,
question.
I just wanted to ask how many applicants are covered by the retroactive clause?
I'm not sure I follow the question. By going back to
the 2016 date.
Yeah.
How many applications?
How many applicants are
qualify?
I'm aware of one.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I can't, is this, and this is a question on the indemnity, was this best practices for most cities to have this indemnification clause?
That the cities be indemnified?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is pretty standard.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah, it became universal pretty quickly after a court first approved the concept.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a couple of questions
Sure.
of my own, Mr. Biddle. Regarding the requirements for reimbursement in terms of the litigation path, it's not obvious to me why, if the purpose of the ordinance is to give the council the discretion to provide an extra measure of support for affordable or other housing projects that the council deems worthy of that kind of support, why we would distinguish the opportunity based on the trial court outcome. It seems, I don't know, it's just not obvious to me. If the project is worthy and an appellate court upholds the approval, why that difference? Is that clear to you based on the direction you've received?
no.
Okay. That answers my question.
Yeah, I don't appreciate the distinction. If the overall thought is that we want to support affordable housing development, why that distinction would make a difference, I don't know.
Thank you. And now a more technical question, if you'll bear with me here. I'm looking at 17.08.200 AC, where residential project is defined for purposes of the ordinance. And it's 5 requirements that all have to be met. There are 2 that I want to link in my question, so I'm going to state this as, in relevant part, residential project shall mean a residential development project defined in section 17.146.020 of this code, which is located in a zoning district in which a residential development project is a permitted use. When I go to 020, we have a fairly broad definition here. A residential development project means a project for the construction or remodeling of any dwelling unit located within the boundaries of the city for which a building permit or discretionary permit is issued by the city, provided that the project consists of 1, the construction of any dwelling unit, except for legally constructed second units as defined, 2, the remodeling of any dwelling unit, unless otherwise accepted, 3, projects that are not otherwise accepted, or 4, the subdivision of land which is planned, designed, or used for the following land use categories. And then it calls out single-family residential and multifamily residential. Where I'm not sure I can parse this out correctly comes from my knowledge of our zoning districts, in which multifamily residential is a permitted use in some, but only a conditional use in others, whereas the single-family residential is permitted in all. So when I come back to Exhibit A here, and 17.08.200 AC, it's not obvious to me whether this definition of residential project includes multifamily projects in a district where they're a conditional use.
No, they're not.
They're not included.
No, because it's conditional use.
But residential projects as defined in the referent section includes single-family projects.
Correct.
So to me, and we can take this up later in deliberations, it's a point of clarification that might usefully be addressed in the text.
So the
Because I think what this means, what you're telling me suggests to me that this means that the project must be a permitted use.
Mhm.
It's not any residential project as defined in the
Correct.
code. It's not really intended to
Yeah,
be
you
that
got
broad.
to satisfy all these.
And again, for me, the confusion is that the code definition that's already in the ordinance includes both single-family and multifamily,
Gotcha.
where we're trying to limit here according to whether they're permitted or conditional. So that's both of my questions. I think this is the time for me to open the public hearing. So the public hearing is open. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to us on this item? That is a resounding no. Well, you know, literary license or something. The public hearing is closed. This is time for our deliberations and any elaboration of questions or the discussion we've just had with the city attorney.
I would like to say something.
Please.
First of all, I'd like to ask you, with respect to what you were trying to get clarification about, is it not the state law now that multifamily housing is built by right now? Is that true or not true? Because I've been
Not true.
told different things.
No, that's
It's
not
not
true.
true. Okay.
That is an oversimplification of state law and prospective state law that raises the bar for denial effectively.
Oh, okay. Thank you. What I would like to see added to the requirements is some language that ensures that if the city is going to be on the stick or on the block, whichever, for fees, that the city should be able to count whatever affordable housing is in the project toward the arena numbers. And the state has some requirements, not just a percentage, for affordable housing in order to be counted as arena numbers, one of which is the time frame for the deed restrictions. So that's one of the requirements that the state has in order to be counted. I think that, and there are others, and I didn't bring them with me. So I don't think it's prudent or fiscally justifiable for us to have this new ordinance unless we can be assured that we're going to be able to count the affordable housing that's being offered by these developments against our arena numbers. Because they have to meet requirements other than the city requirements for a certain number over 4. So unless somebody else is not in agreement with that.
Oh, I will make a note of that. I think we're going to have a number of points of discussion before we're done here. So
That's
I'm going
all
to
I can
sum
think
that
of.
up for note-keeping purposes as must include qualification related to arena numbers. Autumn?
That's all I can think of right now. But
Yeah.
I'll jump in.
Autumn, do you have any comments or changes to propose or discuss?
Not really. I'm trying to wrap my head around the multi-use, multifamily topic that you brought up and what exactly that meant.
What exactly?
Well,
What it
I'm
meant exactly.
going to say for everyone's benefit here, this is unquestionably the most technical ordinance that's come before the commission in my relatively brief tenure, and I have a considerable advantage over most in terms of understanding it. So yeah, it would be hard to get your mind around that. I had to spend more time than I'm used to myself on this one. Dan? And we'll come back to that. I just want to see
I mean,
what other big points of discussion we have as we go.
Yes, I wanted to, in the presentation, to reference that is a, in terms of the mixed-use project, that was an element that I can't remember which council member exactly brought it up, but the idea was that if there is a mixed use, if the residential is a part of a mixed use project, what sort of percentage of the project ought to be devoted to residential for it to qualify. And we really, at the council level, did not really have a lot of discussion on that. And so 60% was my number that I threw there. And in the report, wanted to have you all sort of weigh in on that. So
correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought Commissioner Anderson's question was about multifamily.
It was. I think I misspoke at first and said mixed use when I meant multifamily.
Oh.
My thought was that if this is supposed to be a way for us to help promote affordable housing, it doesn't make sense to do anything that would exclude multifamily.
I agree. But keep my list here. So that's the multifamily when conditional exclusion. There are some multifamily projects that are permitted under our current code. Yeah, mixed use is a separate category, and so with mixed use at this point we have new general plan policies, but not yet an updated zoning ordinance. So we're in
So if it is your point that currently there's no place where this would, right?
If you did a mixed-use project, you'd be excluded because you would need a use permit.
Right.
So you fail
Gotcha.
on the use permit thing. So there's no reason to have mixed use in there at all unless there is
Unless there's a
some
subsequent-
movement to write the exclusion out.
Correct, and so that was sort of, I was curious about that, so I appreciate the discussion, but certainly the council and the commission you're going through a whole zoning process still, if I'm not mistaken, and so you can modify, and who knows where you'll end up.
Yeah.
But to the extent that revised zoning ordinance allows for, mixed use with a certain element of residential in it as of right, it's a permitted use, then this would
It's another little
potentially
thing that we'd
apply.
have to come back and pick up. If the exclusion is deleted now,
Right.
then we wouldn't have to come back and remember, oh, by the way, we got to go back and fix this. So it may be of benefit to eliminate that exclusion. I mean, whether you get a low-cost residential housing development or mixed-use development that contains low-cost housing, whether you get it in a zone, whether you require a conditional use permit or not, I don't know if that's relevant to the use of the project and to the intent of this, which seems to me to be to add a little comfort, if you will, to those kinds of projects that generally across the state has raised more heat than light.
Dan?
I support the idea that of kind of fine tuning that exclusion. If we believe the intent of if we're looking at that the purpose of this is something we believe in, I'd also support Lester's thought that the relief or possible relief shouldn't be tied to whether you win or lose. To me, that's you're agreeing to team. And what kind of team player are you if you're only if we win?
Well,
You're an American player.
I just to be clear, I have no issue myself with the requirement that the city and real party and interest prevail on appeal. What I don't understand is filtering that opportunity by the trial court results. If the goal is to give the city an opportunity at its discretion to provide some financial relief to a project that is of sufficient interest and appeal to the city that it's worthy of that relief, then from my perspective, the trial court outcome should be irrelevant. But that gives us a list of
I have something more if it's
5.
really-
Let me just make my notes here, as
Okay.
otherwise I'll forget.
I would tend to agree with the chair. At the end of the day, I don't think it makes any difference whether or not the city loses the first round. Whether it wins in the end is what counts. And the Court of Appeal is usually the end of these. And there's no
Not
There's no
usually.
write-up if somebody somehow manages to appeal to the state Supreme Court and the city loses there. So I know it's rare,
Yes.
but it could happen.
Mhm.
So we could end up paying for a project to support legal costs for a project that doesn't come to fruition. No, because they don't get to build it, right?
No, that filter is pretty
Yeah.
effective. Did you have another
Yes, I have another.
change to add to my list?
Oh, can't I just voice thoughts about an opinion? I don't know.
Well, sure. I just want to be sure I have a complete list before we come back and go through these. That'll help.
Well, I don't know that this is a. Well, I mean, this is part of the reason I am not completely in support of this. Is it okay for me to say at this point?
Sure.
Okay. I feel that this will take pressure off developers because I think I totally understand that we need housing. But I also understand that the community needs to be able to feel confident that they will have a say in what happens. An influence, not control, but an influence. I think if the developers are off the hook or feel they would be off the hook for any expenses that might happen because residents were not comfortable with the projects that were being applied for, that number one, it would discourage them from reaching out to the residents before they buy the property, which usually doesn't happen, but at least right after, before to see what kind of a reception they're going to get. And I think this would discourage that. It would discourage them reaching out at any point because, I just think it might. So I think also due process is really important to cherish and keep available to residents. And knowing that the city might be on the hook for the expenses of a suit might discourage people from appealing and doing what they are legally have a right to do, which is to sue, without feeling like they're going to be hurting the taxpayers or getting any pressure because they might be, making expenses for the city. I think those are some perhaps unintended consequences, but I can see them. And for me, due process and cooperation between developers and residents is really, really important in our town. I've seen the town really polarized when that gets discouraged. So to the extent that this may do that, and I understand that developers might be discouraged from coming here if there isn't such a thing, but that is part of, that's part of the risk of, developers know that in every city because all the cities have these indemnity clauses. So anyway, that's I don't know if you can put that in your list some way, but I think that due process and discouraging controversial projects, perhaps, because they might be,
Oh,
so.
It sounds as though you're opposed to the whole idea, which we could put on the list, but I don't think that's really a proposal for a change in the text.
I wouldn't say I'm opposed to the whole idea. I would say that that is a consideration, and I'm not sure how that could be. I just think that that's something that hasn't been discussed, and I think it's really relevant to the function of the city. And I don't know if the city council, because we tend to get so emotional about providing housing that we tend to overlook these other things that I think are also important to preserve. So
Two things.
Excuse me a second, John. I'm not sure, but you may be overlooking the fact that this ordinance in no way changes the applicant's burden with respect to the costs of trial, which are significant if a case goes to trial.
but it does the appeal.
Certainly, it
has
really
the
doesn't change.
potential under limited circumstances and at the city's discretion to provide some relief on appeal.
I hear
But-
that. I'm
But
just
with respect to undermining or altering a developer's behavior, I think most of the time you would discover that no developer wants to see a project approval go into litigation. They may accept that cost, they may factor it in to their planning under some circumstances, but it actually takes a pretty large project to absorb those costs on an affordable basis. I think the concerns behind this particular proposal came out of a situation in which the per unit cost of the litigation was prohibitive. And I don't think that separating the risk of appellate costs from trial court costs makes a big difference in that regard myself. I think there's still significant deterrent. Well, it's just my opinion.
Okay, I hear that, but to the extent that it might stop people from appealing
No, I hear
and
you.
going to that court, I think that's worthy of some consideration.
I also want to say I don't think there are any due process concerns involved at all. Due process is about the opportunity to participate. In
Right,
strictest terms, it's notice and the opportunity to be heard.
right,
It's
but
what we do right here every time we meet. There are an endless number of reasons why on any particular issue of controversy, one individual or another might feel inhibited from speaking. It could be because of a personal relationship with one of the parties. It could be because of a business relationship. It could be because the project is so controversial that anyone who comes up to speak runs some risk of public criticism or ridicule, and I think social media have really expanded the costs and consequences of public participation in this regard. The whole subject of fee shifting in litigation, I think, is really beyond anything that can have or will have a meaningful impact on the opportunity to speak. And this is something I feel very strongly about, so I'm going to go ahead and address it now. I was going to bring it up later. The opportunity to come forward at meetings like this in a small community, introduce yourself at the microphone, and tell us what you think is one of the most valuable and I think underappreciated parts of our system of government. It's your opportunity, all of you here, all of you who might be listening at home, it's your opportunity to appear in public, to speak your mind and to express your values and your ideas. And there's a kind of reward, a psychic reward, if you will, that comes with that kind of participation that doesn't come any other way. It is easy for people to be and feel discouraged from that kind of participation. It comes with a certain risk. Not everyone is comfortable speaking in public. Not everyone feels up to criticism, but it's really mostly ideas that are criticized, not people. And in any event, we have a much, much more powerful and better opportunity to do that in a community like St. Helena than almost any other jurisdiction that you can think of. You don't really have that opportunity in Congress. You don't really have that opportunity in Sacramento. You have it here. So I cherish that. My wish is that people would participate more often. I fear that with all of this accessible at one's convenience by video replay, that our public participation is shrinking. It's certainly far below what it was when I served on the city council more than 25 years ago. So it does matter to me.
Can I just say one thing? And I'll stop, I promise. I totally agree with what you just said, and I think that most of the time, most petitioners cannot afford or know how to handle going to an appellate court. I'm just saying that I think that that due process, that right, should not be disparaged as it has been tonight, and it has been on other nights in public, on record, as something that shouldn't have happened. For the very reasons you just said, I think I so cherish the ability to have this system where you can go through whatever you need to go through until there's a final decision, but you've had that opportunity. If you have the means to do it, which most people don't, but if you do, I agree with you, but I don't think that taking something to the appellate court or the Supreme Court should be disparaged as unduly taxing anyone. I think it's really our right as as citizens.
I'll respectfully disagree. I don't think the legal process has added much to the experience of democracy myself, and I say that as a land use lawyer.
Well, it's the best game in town, and as far as I can tell.
More often than I like to think. So I've got a list here of
If I can go back to the
subjects.
60%.
Yes,
yeah. I think maybe a better way to handle that rather than a flat 60% is a sliding scale that's tied to the reimbursement amount if you do a mixed project. So what we're interested in this ordinance is the housing, right? If you do a mixed project, we're not interested in the retail or whatever else is in there. We're strictly interested in the housing. So if somebody's going to put up a mixed housing, a mixed use project that's 80% housing, I think the city should consider, covering up to 80% of their costs. If they put up a mixed housing, that mixed use that's 10% low-cost housing, the city should consider covering 10% of their costs. I realize that may be a backwards way of looking at it, but on the other hand, it gives you something firm to grab onto, and also gives you the opportunity to, and in some ways encourages a project proponent to add more housing.
So then, would you be interested in recommending that the requirement that the multi-use or mixed-use project be a permitted use be deleted from the ordinance, or is this?
I think we already talked about that, and
Right.
yes, I would be in favor of deleting that.
Okay, and,
So that
and,
the project,
and adding the sliding scale.
yeah, I mean, the
Thank you.
residential project, whether it's permitted conditionally or whether it's allowed in the zone, I don't think that makes any difference to the intent on what the ordinance is supposed to do. So I'd like to remove that constriction. But yeah, strictly on the mixed use, I think we should, the city should consider paying the proponent up to, whatever their mixed use,
Whatever that
the
mix,
residential-
whatever that ratio is of housing, right?
that's the top.
Right.
The city, of course, one of my things is to make sure the city could go well below that
Sure.
if they cared to. And I think the wording still isn't really clear on that, but yeah.
The city has
Well-
that discretion, though, as it is.
It does.
Speak to your mic, please,
sorry.
Dan.
I'm just saying the city has that discretion regardless of whether you define it. I get a little leery when we over-define things and sort of back people into a hole where, should that situation happen and you have a mixed use, at that point, the city council would be, responsible to have that sort of discussion and make those arguments that this was so and so percent this and this percentage of this. And because they have full discretion.
Yeah.
Under this ordinance.
Under this ordinance, well, once
I mean-
again, I'm not sure that's crystal clear in here, but even if it is, saying that you have to have 60% of the mixed-use floor area be a residential project before it even qualifies, I'm not sure that's the best decision. So if you got 58%, you don't qualify. You got 59.95%, you don't qualify. I think you should qualify because the idea is we're after more low-cost or workforce housing.
Right.
That's the intent of this coverage. So if you're 10% workforce, low-cost housing, eligible under the RENA numbers, I think you should qualify to be able to apply for this funds,
I wouldn't disagree with that.
and the city should have a max on how much it should pay. I mean, I'd hate to see somebody come in, this is a ridiculous example, we're putting up a mixed-use project of 100,000 feet, and 2,000 square feet of it is, low-cost housing, ergo, we get to dip our beak for 100% of our appeals costs. No. You get to dip your beak for the percentage,
So,
because otherwise you will find somebody reading the detail and gaming the system. That's why our rules have gotten so darn complex.
Well, yeah, but every time you dip your beak doesn't mean that you're going to get something. I mean,
well,
because the city.
the dialogue is becoming circular here, and well, you'll forgive my intervention. On the one hand, I want to stay with this matter while the city attorney is here, out of respect for the general fund. On the other hand, we only have one other item, and everyone else is waiting. So what I'm trying to do here is go through the 5 points that have been raised as possible changes to the ordinance. I want to do them one at a time so that we get to a point where we can actually, by motion, make a recommendation, and I'll probably have some procedural questions for the city attorney before we're done. But right now, and I'm going to leave them tied together because I think that's simplest, we have kind of a two-part subject related to multi-use projects. One part of that is to exclude the requirement that the project be a permitted use, and the other piece is to have the fee reimbursement based on a sliding scale in which the percentage of appellate costs that are reimbursable at the city's discretion is equal to the percentage of floor area in the project that's devoted to residential use. So on that two-part proposal, We've heard from John and Dan. Ms. Manette, Ms. Anderson?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, so it's not.
Is your mic on?
It's just residential, it's not.
Is your mic on?
Oh, it's not, I'm sorry, so it's not affordable, it's just needs to be residential. Is that accurate? Because that's what you just said.
Sorry, what was the question?
I was wondering if, if the percentage of potential reimbursement is tied to the percentage of residential was what?
Well, it's both, because
Or just affordable?
in AC, back to the ordinance, residential project has to meet all 5 parts. Mixed use is a kind of if, but unless I'm misreading this, I don't see any ors in here, Mr. Biddle, so I think you have to meet all the requirements, and there's a kind of sidestep, if you will, in the list for mixed use. So the mixed use project would still have to satisfy the requirements of subsections A, B, or C, which is where the affordable requirement comes in. Am I right, Mr. Biddle?
Correct.
But the percentage of reimbursement will be tied to the whole square footage of the residential, or only to the affordable part of it?
To the whole project,
To
the whole residential component.
Okay,
That
that's
would
what I
make
wanted
it
to-
consistent then
Okay.
with the other residential projects that are entirely residential, but which qualify if they meet the affordable component
I've
requirements
got,
in the
okay,
code.
right, which, and can you or can someone, I'm confused about the definition of workforce housing. I have heard that it is not a definition that the state uses when they're deciding on RENA numbers, that it's really not a legal
Is-
definition, but.
Is
what it?
workforce housing in this ordinance?
No, but that's what,
I did mention the term,
Yeah.
just so I can probably get more confusing. No, I did mention the term, but that has nothing to do with this ordinance. I mean, we're talking
okay, so
about,
we can
we are
clarify
talking
that on
about,
another.
we're
Yeah,
talking
I
about
think that's
low-cost housing.
It's a great subject, but for another time. Ms. Anderson, anything? Okay, so, yeah, no, it's straw vote time. I know you're in favor, John, you're the proponent. You had some questions, Dan, you have anything?
No, are we, straw voting on which, just
Just the multi-use piece. I want to have a sense of where the commission is before I go on to the next one. Right.
Yes, I would support
Okay. And I see 2 nodding heads to my left. That's good enough. I'll note for the record that that was Ms. Manette and Ms. Anderson who were nodding. Those of you who are here know who's to my left, but there you have it. So, then I'm going to go to the next item on my list, which was my proposal that, as I put it, we eliminate the trial court outcome filter, that the potential for reimbursement be available for any qualifying project that prevails on appeal. And of course, it would also apply if, well, it doesn't apply if there's no appeal, excuse me. Doesn't matter if the developer succeeds at trial. If there's no appeal, there's no potential for reimbursement. So I'm just keeping myself more or less unconfused. So it would be the same, okay? To my right, Mr. Hale and Mr. Pont have given me the thumbs up. To my left, oh, 2 more. That would be Ms. Manette and Ms. Anderson. So that takes care of that one. I'm going to go back, John, to your first comment, which was a request for a clarification in the text regarding the city council's discretion to vary the reimbursement from nothing to a full amount. I'm thinking, Mr. Biddle, that you believe that's clear enough, but I would respectfully suggest that Mr. Pont may be looking for someone that a person who isn't a lawyer would grasp easily.
I want anybody to read this to figure out what it says.
You don't have your mic on. That's all right.
I want anybody who reads this to be able to figure out what it says, and 3 or 4 additional words: a fixed sum as determined by the city council, which may be 0 or may be
He
the full
understands.
cost.
He's thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly craft something. I'm not sure you want me to do it here on the fly.
No, I don't
Just
think
dumb
you
it
need
down
to.
a little
And,
bit.
We'll get back to the subject of how the commission's recommendation gets implemented process-wise through drafting a little further on. So that was the subject of Mr. Pont's first proposal. Mr. Hale, does that make sense to you? The clarification? Ms. Anderson, okay, I'm getting
The bobbleheads.
I'm getting the thumbs up all the way around. That's looking unanimous. So I don't think I have to clarify that. Then the next came from Ms. Manette, who proposed a qualifier in the ordinance related to RENA requirements. And I believe, so you'll need to tell me whether or not I've got this right, but I believe your proposal was that the draft be amended so that the definition of a qualifying project included a requirement that the affordable units that make it a qualifying project with respect to 17.146.050 include units that meet the RENA requirements imposed by the state of California through the regional agency.
That's, yes, not just for affordable, though. I would say for all the housing, for all the RENA numbers, that would, all the numbers that were going towards RENA, I mean, especially affordable, but we have other RENA numbers that we have to meet as well, market rate and so forth. And there may be requirements at the state level that we don't, I just think that whatever requirements that the state has in order to count our housing against our RENA numbers need to be met. That's all, because I think...
So let me see if I can clarify this a bit further. So do you mean that a project should not qualify for reimbursement if there's no affordable component that meets the RENA requirements, or are you proposing instead rather that there would be no reimbursement possible if the city's already met its RENA requirements and has approved something that goes beyond that?
I didn't address that part of it. I'm just saying it needs to be part of the language that, since we're going to be on the block of having to pay money, perhaps, that if we allow someone to, to apply for this, that the housing that development has produced meet the requirements of the state so that we can count it against our RENA numbers.
Right, but if we've already met our RENA numbers, then where are you?
Well, I hadn't thought of that piece. We can talk about that now, but I think the first part should be in there. If we've already met our RENA numbers, then perhaps it's, I won't say moot because that's not, because I don't really understand what that word means, but perhaps it wouldn't apply then, and it wouldn't be a requirement. If you can't meet a requirement because there's nothing to meet, then it wouldn't be a requirement. But it should be a requirement, I feel, if the RENA numbers have not been met. You might argue that we should, that we should always be building our housing with those state requirements in mind, so that they could meet the RENA the requirements in order to be counted against our RENA obligations.
A question, Bobby. When you say all RENA categories, do you mean market rate
There's market
and
rate.
above market rate? I would think we wouldn't care about market rate and above market rate categories in this instance.
We're supposed to meet our RENA numbers. We're supposed to build a certain number of housing in all of the categories,
including market rate and
Yes.
above market rate.
and medium, low, low.
And I don't think we want to count these in that at all.
I think we need to, if the city is going to perhaps have to pay money, taxpayer money.
No,
that-
wait, hold on a second.
Yeah.
The reimbursement is always at the council's discretion.
I understand that, but I think it should
So
be.
there's no circumstance under which the city has to reimburse money.
I understand that, but I think it should be one of the requirements.
Okay.
That in order to ask for the money, you have to be able, that project has to have housing that can be counted against the RENA numbers. And that means
so-
they have to meet state requirements.
I understand. So I have a question now for Mr.
Housing
Biddle.
counts against RENA numbers. I just don't think counting.
Can you think of, and let's assume that the city hasn't met any RENA requirements for a particular housing cycle, just for my hypothetical.
Okay.
Can you think of a circumstance in which a project that met the definition of a qualifying residential project with respect to the city's affordable housing requirements as set out in 17.146.0450 would ever not qualify or meet any RENA requirements? Because I'm thinking that's unlikely. But I'm not so sophisticated about this that I can think it all the way through without help.
So I think we need to be clear, and perhaps for Commissioner Manette, if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
That's actually, thank you, yes.
That RENA encompasses not just, and so I guess my question for you, when you use the term RENA, are you thinking about the affordability aspect?
Mostly, yes.
Because RENA has certain obligations for a city to produce total number of units,
Yes.
irrespective of their affordability
Yes.
level, and then different components,
Yes.
those that are low, very low, moderate,
Right.
etc. So when you are thinking that these units would otherwise comply with RENA, I am discerning that your intent is that they meet some the affordability component of the city's RENA numbers.
No,
Because any unit produced, regardless of its affordability level or restriction, is counted towards some component of the city's RENA numbers overall.
Not necessarily. There are state requirements that aren't part of our requirements. For example, the deed restriction time limits. Those are different. There are very specific deed restriction time limits given by the state.
I'm aware of that.
In order to count affordable as affordable. So if those deed restriction time limits are not part of the affordability for the developer, then they won't count against our RENA numbers for affordability.
But the production of the unit will. There's a requirement that a city produce a total number of units. So whether that unit is restricted for 55 years for a rental or 45 years for a for sale unit, which is generally what the requirement is under state law, or if under the city's program, and I'm not sure of all the details of the city's requirements, but let's say it's only a 20-year covenant. Well, that doesn't satisfy the state requirement,
Right.
but still it is a unit that's been produced and it satisfies the total number
But
of
not the
units,
affordable. It won't
but not,
satisfy the
that's my
affordable.
question to you. So are you really aiming your comment
Yes.
at, we want to make sure that these units are satisfying a state RENA requirement
For affordable, yes.
for affordable?
Yes, thank you.
And
Yeah.
and you're, so that could be, it could either be at very low, low, moderate, of any of those categories.
That's correct. That's what. Thank you for that clarification. And that's what I meant initially, and then I thought maybe I should include them all, but that was a bad.
No, that's fine. I
bad
just wanted to be
path go.
clear about that.
Okay,
So
thank
it's
you.
really the RENA affordability component of the RENA numbers.
Thank you. So let's complete our discussion then of this proposal. Commissioner Hale, do you have any thoughts on this? And you can pass and we can come back. That's an option.
Yeah, I'm happy to see.
It seems to me this whole ordinance modification is aimed at that housing, low, very low. I'm not sure it includes the moderate category, but let's say that it does. Okay, let's say that it does. All of which we're well short of. I think it makes sense in a lot of ways if the city's going to encourage that kind of housing, and probably get a gold star from HCD for doing so, that we should make sure that it's a bright gold star rather than one that has some tarnish on it, and go ahead and say, yes, if we're going to pay you your defense costs at the appellate level, or your appeal costs at the appellate level, either way, it should be for that kind of housing.
So, in your view, the definitions in the city's code in and of themselves are not sufficient?
I don't think they track 100% with what the state requires to fall into those
sure that's true.
categories.
I'm sure that's true. Okay, that's just a point of clarification for me. Ms. Anderson?
I would agree that it's a good idea.
Well, I'm going to confess I'm reluctant to complicate an already very technical ordinance, but I'm going to, if Mr. Biddle assures me that this is not a drafting challenge, I'm going to support it.
Yeah, no, I've already sort of played around with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you all for that then. So my next and last item, it looks like, is Ms. Anderson's comment on multifamily. This is one of these embarrassing moments when I'm not sure I can read my own handwriting. Don't. Was this so that we were sure that multifamily projects were not excluded based on zoning? Okay. And, right, so this would eliminate the qualifier that
It'd be a permitted use.
that it be a
I
permitted
think it kind of
use.
ties into
And
your first.
Yes, it does. It does. They may be a bit of overlap
Right.
there. I just wanted to be sure I hit everyone's contribution, and are we all on board with that? I think that's unanimous. So, my next, well, I have a couple of questions for the city attorney. First, do you know what we just proposed?
Sure do.
Good. Okay. As I say, I'm already at the point I'm not sure I can read my notes. second then. Would this be a situation where where you would want to draft something and bring it back to us before it goes on to the council? Or is this a situation where you would prefer to encourage us to rely on your command of our intentions and send your revision straight to the council?
I think I would prefer the latter. And what I will do is there'll be a report that goes to the council, and I'll identify these recommended changes, and I will provide to them the ordinance that I had initially presented to you, and I'll also provide them a red line that'll show the changes that I have made in response to your recommended changes to the ordinance, so that they can see how it's been revised to reflect your recommendations.
Thank you.
And that will show up on the agenda when it's mailed out 10 days before the meeting. Is that accurate?
I believe that's the city's practice, correct?
Well, that's the agenda practice. Staff reports and supporting materials sometimes can lag.
This is going to the council on the 13th, so Mike's going to have that to the city clerk by Friday.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. I get it now.
Can we get a copy, or is that not kosher?
Of the
It'll go out to everyone.
It'll come to us
as part of an
as
amended
commissioners?
council
Okay.
agenda.
I think we get all the council agendas as
Well, we
it is,
do. I
we
just
not?
wondered if.
going-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get
It's
it.
going when? Next Tuesday? Thank you.
Yes. I'll offer you the chair's condolences on that one. So I think we're at a point where we could entertain a motion that incorporates by reference all of the items we've discussed, having heard the city attorney assure us that he's got it down.
Move the stack recommendation as modified.
Second.
Ms. Gamero, there I go.
Vice Chair Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Hale,
Yes.
Chair Hardy.
Yes,
Be sure to jump in.
thank you, Mr. Biddle.
Thank you. It's nice meeting all of you. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
So now, I don't often get to say this, but now we get to the item that all of you have been waiting for, which is
6.1.
Scheduled Matter 6.1, request for approval of a master sign permit to address the signage needs of multiple tenants in the existing building located at 1111 Main Street in the Central Business District. I'm assuming, until you tell me otherwise, Mr. Heacock, that this is yours to present?
That's correct. Thank you,
Thank
Chair
you.
Hardy. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible in the sake of time. So as you mentioned, the applicant is requesting approval of a master use permit and in order to address the signage needs of multiple tenants in the existing building. For the applicant, being able to obtain the sign permit reduces the time and cost associated with each tenant obtaining the sign permit individually. I won't describe each sign that was presented in the staff report individually. However, I would like to make note, it has been provided on the dais and in the back, amendments to page 5 and 6 that show the dimensions and square footage of the England Volker sign. It has been corrected to read 19 square feet as opposed to 24.5. The 24.5 essentially counted the width of the letters, width and height, going above the two dots above the O. It does not count the bar that supports the letters or the lighting within the bar. The lighting that is proposed is a wall wash lighting on the north and east side elevations only. This lighting is independent from the signage, and that it would consist of LED strips attached to the back of that aluminum beam supporting the signage. The east elevation would have 20 LEDs producing 255 lumens for a total of 5,100 lumens. And the north elevation would have both a 20-foot and 25-foot LED strip. The 25-foot strip produces 6,375 lumens, resulting in approximately 11,475 lumens total on the north elevation. And for reference, as noted in the staff report, one 75-watt light bulb is approximately 1,100 lumens, and one 100-watt light bulb is approximately 1,600 lumens. Therefore, the lighting on the north elevation is equivalent to approximately 7 100-watt light bulbs. And the illumination on the east would be approximately 3. You will note in the exhibits that it does show a future tenant 4, while it also shows a future tenant 5 on some of the other ones. And it's staff's understanding that the building owner currently has 4 tenants, but we'll also wanted to include a 5th should there be one in the future, and so it would be permitted by the master use permit. And staff has added a condition of approval in the attached resolution requiring that any future signage that is approved through this would require an administrative sign permit through the planning department. Staff did receive one letter in regards to this, and that was provided on the dais in the back as well, that essentially expresses a general concern for the real estate signage and just general concern for that with the project. In that vein, in addition to the cumulative illumination on the north and east side, staff does have some concerns regarding the size and quantity of the signage associated with the real estate use being on the corner of both the north and east side, and is requesting commission input on those aspects of the application. That said, staff is in general support of the application and does recommend that the Planning Commission determine that it is exempt from the requirements of CEQA pursuant to Section 15.311 and approve, modify, or deny the resolution approving the master sign permit for 1111 Main Street, allowing the signage described in the report in compliance with the attached resolution. I would be happy to answer any questions you have. Sign architect, if you will, a designer is here, as well as several of the proposed tenants.
Any questions for Mr. Heacock from the commission? Mr. Pond?
Yeah, I do have some. Am I to understand that the new calculations on the Engel and Volker signs do not include the space for the lighting?
That, I believe that's correct. The lighting is essentially attached to the bar that supports the signage along the bottom.
Generally speaking, when you have a lit sign that's washed from underneath, isn't that included as part of the sign? I would suggest that's part and parcel of the sign.
I think that would be a fair assessment.
Okay, so this
That would add
a few square feet.
Yeah, a few square
Okay. Second, the detail on page 8. Looking at this, I would say the tenant signs stuck to the back are 6 square feet, 2 feet by 3 feet. The just because you put the tenant in the center is clearly a decorative border. I don't think reduces the size of the sign to the size that's inside the decorative border. So I would suggest that these signs were 6 square feet, not 3.11 square feet.
I would agree with that. Thank you. Forgot to mention that in the report.
Are you aware of anybody in the central business district that has a 100 square foot sign?
In the central business district, No, I can't think of any.
No. And this application, to my reading, includes 2 signs that exceed that size. Is that correct?
You're referring to the
Yes.
back of the building sign?
Yes.
Technically, yes. They are a majority building space in between it. I mean, you're actually measuring the letters. They wouldn't be that much, but yeah.
Well, our general method of figuring out the sign space is to draw a simple figure around it and add everything up, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so using our standard methodology, these would be the largest signs in the downtown. Okay. Are you aware of any buildings downtown that have 5 signs that give the address? There's already 1 on the building. I don't see any move to withdraw that 1. And this application appears to have 4 new building ID signs.
Yeah, I can't think of any.
Okay. And I'm asking these questions because, correct me if I'm wrong, now when somebody comes to the Planning Commission for a sign permit, there's no limitations on size or number. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So each one of these is a one-off.
That's correct.
I'm asking these questions for comparative purposes to the remainder of the signs in the Central Business District. Each one of these is individual. The Planning Commission can award whatever it darn well cares. Okay. Are you also, if we grant this as written, the 5th tenant is automatically included at size what? I know they need to come to you for a release, but...
About 11 square feet, I think, is...
So that would be the max on that, on the last tenant.
Yeah.
Okay. So, if I add this all up, what they're asking for, changing those 3 signs from the 3 square feet to the 6 square feet, which they appear to be, and adding in the last tenant, the signage on this building is approaching 400 square feet. Is that reasonably correct?
That sounds right.
Is there anyone else in town that has 400 square feet of signage on their building?
Maybe Central Valley. I don't, in town. Yeah, I don't know.
And they're well outside of the Central Business District.
That's right.
So there's nobody in the Central Business District that has 400 square feet of signage on their building.
None that I can think of.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hale?
I'm not sure that we, but, being that as these come before us, they are one-offs, and in that there is a imagined anyway. That and I'm sure in the language there's going to be because we did this, we're not saying everybody can do this. I think it's our responsibility to look at each site, look at each condition, and make that judgment, and be comfortable with it. I think the back, calling the 1111 Main on the corners, and the sweep in the arc. I think throwing 200 square feet to that value and putting great weight to that, I think, isn't really reflective of what's happening there. I think it was. I think part of the goal of this, I'm sure the owner of this project is to re-energize what has been a long dormant husk of a building, and I think part of the challenge of that is to say, hey, I am here. I am no longer an empty husk of a building. I've got some things are happening here. I think the 1111 Main on the back is artful and creative, and I don't see how it should hold this back. I think the other signs I find, I think the challenge there is you've got one building with 4, maybe 5, potentially 5 spaces. They're each going to have signage, and they're each entitled to signage. So I think in my view, they've done they've kind of accepted that challenge and brought something together that allows some individual expression and an effort at characterizing what's inside, and at the same time fit to the architecture of the building and have some continuity in their overall approach. So I don't take issue with this. I would support it.
Any other
For questions.
questions for staff? Mr. Pond.
One more, if I could, please. The lighting. Other than the movie theater, is there anybody that has that kind of luminosity? I mean, I know we've approved some signs, we've actually dialed down on the luminosity.
I would hate to speculate on that. I know St. Helena Plaza's got outdoor lights. Goose and Gander has outdoor lights.
Essentially 1,000 watts on a building that size. If we're going with 100-watt light bulb equivalents, that's a lot of light.
Do they go 24 hours or do they turn off?
And it's all pointed up.
Is it? Are the lights? There's no turn off time.
That's something you guys could discuss and provide direction on if you wanted to.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it for questions for staff. So I'd like to invite the applicant or the applicant's representative to speak.
Good evening, Neil Caldwell with Well Design. I'd like to thank the commission for hearing this item tonight. Thank you, Aaron, for your work on this project so far, city staff. I'll kind of talk about our overall design goal on the project, and then I can speak to some of the considerations that have already come up and try and answer some questions preemptively. I'm more than welcome to answer any questions following my presentation. And then, as Aaron stated, there are several tenants here, which I'm sure would be happy to weigh in on any items or answer things that are specific, maybe more paramount to their branding specifically that I can't answer. We do have a graphic video that I feel like gives a good representation of the signage and the look that we're going for. If Zinnia wouldn't mind playing that, this kind of gives you a little bit more perspective of what it'd be like to actually experience the signage approaching the parking lot. This is to scale in reference to the Wells Fargo building and the space around the parking lot. So it gives you a little bit of a feel for what we're going for here. While this plays, I will comment that I understand the sensitivity regarding the quantity of signage on the property. I will state that the building is designed to hold up to 5 tenants, currently 4. It is one of the few multi-tenant buildings in the commercial district. There's not a lot that have multitude of tenants that are designed for both retail and services. This building also is unique in the sense that it has 4 elevations that are all visible by traffic passing by. So it's not like you would ever see all of this signage at one time. In fact, it's usually when you're passing by. Primary elevations are only visible when you're headed southbound on Highway 29. The north-facing elevation is the primary frontage for tenant signage, and that faces into the parking lot of Sunshine Foods. So it's really only visible when you're headed southbound. The east-facing elevation, which would feature Engel and Volkers, is shrouded by a large olive tree that's positioned in the corner of the parking lot between Wells Fargo and the subject property, which blocks out a significant percentage of the visibility of that area. As stated by Commissioner Hale, the goal of the 1111 branding is really to give these tenants an identity for their building and to revitalize this building. If someone were to call my business and say, where are you located? I'd love to say 1111 Main Street rather than we're sandwiched in between Wells Fargo and Sunshine Foods, even if that has maybe been the standard for many years. The goal was to create an identity and design a sign program that matched the architecture and style of the new facelift on the building. The signage in the back, the kind of screening appearance around the signs appears very heavy in our printouts. It actually is going to be very similar to the decorative screening that's around the top that covers all of the HVAC equipment. We thought that was a really nice detail, and we wanted to try and pull that into the signage. That's why it was left out of the square footage calculations, but we're happy to revise and add it back in just so that it matches a traditional definition of square footage. The overall design of the signage, with letters being mounted to a bar that slightly projects off the front of the building, is to allow that when tenants move in and out, their signage can come off, the bar remains stationary. The lighting remains consistent over the years. We don't have tenants coming in with new types of illumination. The illumination is under control of the property owner, and illumination is fully dimmable down to 0% and is all run by solid state drivers that will provide very constant and even illumination. The issue that we run into when working with LED lights is that manufacturers are currently making strips that have, let's say, 75 lumens per foot, and then you have other people that are doing 255 lumens per foot. There isn't a good middle gap, which is where dimmers have really solved that issue in the market. The signage can be dimmed down to whatever is an agreeable amount. When we've done programs like this in other municipalities, there's been a review period where council's actually able to see the signage in place illuminated, and they have a certain amount of days to come back and determine whether or not the illumination is suitable, can go up, should come down, etc. So that is a fully variable amount, and I understand that the math of the amount of illumination might appear to be scary, but we would not propose having the full amount of lumens as presented. Those are just the technical directives. So again, it would be fully dimmable, and that's a warm white wash that's designed that actually projects back towards the building, illuminating the wall surface behind the letters. So in the sign industry, we would refer to that effect normally as a halo illuminated sign, where you have signage with lighting encased in it projecting against the surface behind it. The reason, again, we didn't go with individual illuminated letters is that tenants moving in, tenants moving out, we wanted to eliminate the variability of those lighting conditions and just come up with something that was constant and added an architectural element of the building. I'm happy to answer any questions that commission might have. I'll do that to the best of my ability.
Well, was the size of the sign tied in any way to the square footage of the business?
No, it was not. We did it more based on frontages. So Engel and Volkers is on, I would consider them the anchor tenant occupying the corner space. So that was the reason that they've got two elevations of signage. The other signage is really divided up based on the logo content that we're working with. So Fit NV, for instance, has a very dynamic type style. Their lettering is actually upwards of 33 inches high for the letter F. It just sort of worked with their branding to give them signage that was that tall. So what we tried to do was average out the overall visual balance of the property. We didn't run specific directives from signage to square footage.
As a matter of fact, though, is the Engels and Volker the largest square footage business?
I believe it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
You spoke about some of the signage being blocked in the front due to trees. There's also a tree in the back that would block one of your signs. Do you intend to remove it?
I do not believe there's any intention to remove any of the
Okay, so you're
landscape.
putting up a sign that's going to be blocked by a tree.
The elevation that's visible at is a curved road that has many different approach angles.
I'm familiar with the road back there. I'm also familiar with the traffic volume back there, and you're not going to get much volume. I mean, it's not that heavily trafficked. So your LEDs are fully dimmable?
Yes,
So this is just the max,
yes.
but you're requesting the max.
We're requesting approval of that product type because when
Okay.
we submit, we need to list
I noticed
specification.
it's all up lighting,
It's actually lighting that is pointing back towards the building. So
and it's going to reflect off the building up, right?
well, there
Because
would
you're set
be
at an angle, it's going to go, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so,
The angle is approximately 70 degrees. So if this is 90 and the lighting would be projecting straight back, creating a wash going up and down and back,
right.
our angle is 70 degrees.
Right.
So we've
But you've
changed.
got no overhang, so it's essentially adding to the ambient loading lighting in the area, correct?
Similar to
Yeah.
any type of decorative uplighting,
Yeah.
yes.
And
That lighting
I
source is only 8
understand,
inches
I
away from
understand
the wall.
your thought about, gee, we want to really make our building identifiable. Did you look at what is in the community to scale what you were doing to what's in the community? Or is this solely driven by the single location?
I would say that there's a balance that we struck to achieve. At the end of the day, I weighted the balance towards the architectural features of the building.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, then, thank you, and I'll open the public hearing. Anyone wish to speak?
My name is Will Densberger, representing Engel and Volkers tonight. First of all, thank you guys all for the opportunity to participate. I wanted to thank Neil for his efforts in putting together our sign package. I think you guys, as a native here, I think you understand the challenges that the developer had sort of giving life to the old Ben Franklin, and I appreciate their efforts. As far as the signage and the scale, from my perspective, and I've got a little bit of retail development experience in my younger days, I think the challenges that we have as a community of putting this, making this a vital space is the distance, the unique distance that it has from the main street that we all travel, and the orientation. I think Neil pointed out that typically, as you would see with Sunshine, they face straight out 90 degrees out to Main Street, and we all have a very good sense of that. I think one of the large problems that Ben Franklin had and Sprouse REITs before that was that they didn't have that identity, and they had some problems. You know, the way this property is developed with that space hidden back behind Sunshine, there are multiple problems here, and so I applaud the developer over the long haul in doing what they've done to resurrect the identity of this. As far as our use goes, I appreciate again the fact that I think the citizens that I've talked to in the community understand the unique nature of what we're offering there with our real estate company and how it's going to be different. Again, as a native, I kind of feel like I have a pretty good sense of our community. The advisors that I've added to our staff are all been here at least 20 years, and many of you might be their clients. But I think the scale of the signage that I think I would like for everyone to sort of understand, at least from my perspective, is I think I was out there this morning looking at Sunshine and looking at the new Joel Gott signage there and Wells Fargo, and it feels like the scale of what Neil's put together is pretty appropriate. By my estimation, we're 50 yards off of Main Street, which is 150 feet, turned 90 degrees in the wrong direction, and when you look at the scale of the Sunshine signage, I think in the the exhibit that Neil put together. I think it's like 16 or 17 inches wide, just the signage, and then the band that you were talking about is probably 3 or 4 inches higher and lower, and then that scale, I don't know what that is, but I feel like what Neil has proposed as far as the tenant identifications is appropriate, and I appreciate that. I'm not sure if I have an opinion on the backside signage, the building identifier, but in any event, it's there and I don't find it objectionable. I don't know if you have any questions of me while I'm up here, but I'm happy to take questions.
I noticed that the northern exposure of the building has all 4 names of all 4 businesses and room for 5. And I'm wondering the east exposure has only 1 sign. Is that the decision of the other businesses, or is that the designers? I'm curious why.
We can have the designer come back up. The tree that you're the referencing sits right there in the sort of L between the Engel and Volker space and the Wells Fargo. So I think the idea is, and one of the other tenants has at least initially proposed, that we work with the city to develop a small parklet that you guys have talked about in that area, which would likely require that we trim that tree somewhat and make that signage a little bit more visible.
Well, I mean, does that mean you would add the signs of the other businesses, or did they want that, or has that been discussed? I just wondered.
It hasn't been discussed by me. That would be a developer question, and then also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Anyone else wish to speak?
Annette Schaefer, and I'm the tenant in number 2, Crisp Kitchen and Juice.
Just speak to the microphone,
Sorry.
please.
Annette Schaefer, and I'm the second tenant there. And I have to start also by saying thank you so much to the city, because they've been really helpful. It's my first experience going through all of this, and it's a lot. I'm putting in a food concept into that area, and I've gotten a lot of really positive reception from the community, encouragement, cheers, all kinds of good stuff. So very local serving. I am local, and I'm a local business owner. No anybody else, behind me. It's just me. So the success of my business there really depends on exposure and signage. And currently what I see is very deficient for me in the exposure. And for you probably don't know, but that whole bay, the second bay, that's what I have as far as square footage. And probably we can clarify. You had asked the question, Commissioner Monette, about how much square footage Engel and Volkers has versus everybody else in the building. And I don't believe you're the largest, right? I think I'm the largest tenant. So I have the most square footage.
Oh, okay.
In the building, just
so
to clarify.
It's not really related to the signs, yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
okay.
which is a bit
Thank
puzzling,
you for
but
clarifying.
yeah. So it's, I mean, I really, as Chair Hardy said earlier, I really cherish the opportunity to have a voice and to be up here and speak. And I really feel it's important. I don't know how the other tenants feel, but really to be able to maximize our exposure, maybe to make it a bit more even. But I just wanted to give the commission the heads up that I would love to come back and work with Aaron, work with the city to amend it a bit. Also, on the east-facing side, I was told by the building owner that was a tenant-driven sign. That's not a building owner-driven sign. So I'm not aware that the other tenants had the ability to propose anything. I did go to the building owner early on, and they counseled that they would like to get through this process, and then we could entertain other signage. So I was pretty much doing as I was requested. So that's, I mean, I'm happy to entertain questions if you have as well.
I'm just wondering, does that mean you're still kind of in the design thing? I think I heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, that you might be interested in making the sizes a little more even.
I would be. That would be great.
So this isn't a final design necessarily? I mean,
this is what you're being presented.
Okay, does that also mean that you would want some exposure on the east side of the building?
I mean, I would like for it to be equitable. I mean, that would make a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah.
and primarily because being a food business, I really need that exposure, walking traffic otherwise. And if I'm already underneath the overhang and kind of in the corner, it's a disadvantage.
Okay, thanks.
I'm also not sure what would happen with a fifth tenant, how they would really, I know. So yeah. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And again, happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I'll close the public hearing. Where do we go from here?
Oh, go ahead.
I'll just start by saying what I would like to see happen.
Please.
With the signs. I would like the east-west signs removed and the Engel Invoker sign to be made a lot smaller.
I'm thinking too.
Just so that I'm sure I understand, I'm slow to orient to this in terms of cardinal direction. By the east-west signs, which do you mean?
The eastern sign on the Wells Fargo side of the building, and the western sign facing.
Northern sign. That's not.
Nope.
Oh.
Western.
So the sign facing Main Street and then the sign on the opposite side of the
Exactly.
building.
Sorry.
Exactly. Facing Oak.
I was thinking that. Is that okay if I go? Yeah. Or,
Sure.
I've been talking a lot. I've been thinking that I really love that the signs are different from each other, and they reflect the soul of the business that's going in. But I do think they should be the same size. I think the standard. I don't think the signs themselves should be the same, but I think the size should be standard, and maybe they all should be. The Engels one would be smaller, and they all. And also, I think that on the eastern side, they should all the businesses should be listed there too. I mean, have signs there too. Again, a standard size, but individual art form, so of the letters and so forth.
Commissioner Pont.
I certainly appreciate the time and effort they put into redoing what was an always difficult to occupy and operate building. However, I think we're seeing here the results of the change in the sign ordinance, where literally there are no caps. I think they're too big, they're too many, and too bright, in that order. You don't find, that's why I asked the size questions. You don't find 400 square feet of signs on any building in town. You don't find 100 square foot signs any building on Main Street. Part of being part of the community is to be part of the community. I recognize you're set back from the street, but then so is Sunshine. And Sunshine is a successful business that has been here for years. So I'm not so sure that sign brightness and size equilibrates to active, healthy business. I know that every business owner I've ever talked to thinks it does. I'm not sure it actually does. The 200 square footers, no. Way too large for the community. I think they should just go. I didn't see anybody mention or speak to the address sign that's already on the building, so I assume that's going to stay. I don't think any building in town has 5 address signs on it. This building shouldn't have 5 address signs on it. Every one of these signs exceeds what can be administratively granted by at least 100%. Too large, too many, and too bright. I would prefer the 200 square footers disappear, that the large 1111 Main Street on the front be reduced in size, because frankly, if you're looking for it, everybody will say, oh, well, they're in the old Ben Franklin building, or they're right next to Sunshine, or they're right behind Wells Fargo. Nobody's going to say 11111 Main Street. Sorry. I think the lighting is too high. It should be restricted to, I believe, no more than half of what's available, particularly since that's all going to wash up and increase the ambient lighting in the neighborhood. The signs that identify the individual businesses, I don't mind 11 or 12 square feet. That's more than twice than what's allowed in the administrative code, but that's okay. 50 square feet? I think that's a little much.
Commissioner Hale?
I wasn't really expecting to, and I don't think it's my job to weigh in on sort of inner tenant dynamics. I think it'd be foolish for us up here to kind of come to this project and understand the different weighting and the different decision making that goes into why one space gets. I don't think calling out just who has the biggest space in this sort of thing, it just ignores an awful lot. Clearly the Engel and Volker space is probably the most prized, and that's not a insult to the others. It's just the reality of the layout of this thing. It's the most visible one. The other ones are tucked back, and I think the developer came up with a kind of an artful way to sort of deal with that dynamic. I don't have any issue with what I see as rising kind of to the challenge of rebranding this building. I think that was important to do. I don't have a problem with the signs in the back. I think they're subtle. I think it's a subtle reminder. It's commercial space there. I don't have a problem with the lighting. I think commercial buildings light themselves. Often it might, if you came to this and had a light that was projecting onto the building, it wouldn't be included in the sign, and it wouldn't be up for us to even jabber about up here. This is done kind of more integrated approach to the building. So I think to be penalized for that sort of more sophisticated approach where you could have just spotlit this thing and washed the whole wall, and we wouldn't have a thing to say about it. This is more subtle. I really think it's a problem when we up here tell people how to do their business and get flip and underestimate what it takes to do business in this town. I don't think we can kind of say, well, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this. I think we part of our, to me, there's not a reason enough here to say no to this. It's not for me to design it. I think it's for folks to try to do business here and try and maybe fail. And I would encourage you as tenants to work out some of those issues. Would have been better to do before this, because I think it just sort of threw some muck in the works. But I would support this. So.
I just had one other thing. I mean, I agree with what was just said. I don't. The two of the tenants aren't here, and two are, but it sounds like they haven't all worked together on this, or the two of the tenants didn't speak, and I don't know if. I mean, it seems to me that would be a really good idea before going forward for everyone to get together and talk. If you haven't, for everyone to get together and talk about how you can, come up and make it work for all of you. I piggyback on what you said. Yeah. I think that would be a very important thing to do before making a decision.
If there's someone else that would like to speak, I'm happy to reopen the public hearing. I'll leave it to you to determine whether your comments will be helpful. Please come to the podium and I will reopen the public hearing, which is now open.
Thank you. My name's Casey Miller, and I am the owner of Fit and Be. Thank you guys for letting us be here. I appreciate it. I agree that I think a lot of this should have been discussed prior to this, and I agree that I think it would be in our best interest to discuss that. I agree with Dan. I think that this is going to light up Main Street. I think this is going to be good. I think that the issues with signage, I agree, I think need to be discussed amongst us and with the owners. But as far as anything else to do with my personal sign or anyone else's, if there's a question for me, I'm happy to answer it. But I'm excited for, I think, what this is going to do. And just, this wasn't stated, but I know there's an option for a tenant 5, but the building is completely leased and spoken for, so there won't be, at least in the immediate.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Public hearing is closed. I have a kind of mixed bag of reactions myself. I like the building identifier logo. To me, it makes sense. It reads well. The number 1 is so easily identified. I think it may be not so important in terms of legibility to make it as big as it is, but I don't feel challenged by the size either. I think having a building identity should work to everyone's benefit. I'm sure that's the intent. It is certainly not in the Commission's purview to manage owner and tenant conversations about things like signage, but at the same time, and I think really because of community-wide concerns about the state of affairs on Main Street, I do feel very strongly that as a commissioner and as chair of the Planning Commission, that when we have some part in the process by which new businesses come into Main Street or existing businesses relocate, that we have a stake of some kind in seeing those businesses thrive. I mean, that's always the goal. We don't necessarily have much of anything we can do to help. It's probably more like the the bit about physician do no harm. We're probably doing well if we just get out of the way in many respects. But But I think it's important for everyone involved to understand that it matters to us. It certainly matters to me. I don't know that I can or should attempt to speak for the entire commission, but it matters to me. This whole business of requiring applications to the city and going through a process and coming before this commission for an approval or not, as sometimes happens, so rarely, it doesn't mean much if we don't share a goal of success for the enterprise. Main Street, our central business district, is a community resource, and the success of it matters. So, I think we do have some responsibility and certainly some discretion with respect to the overall parameters, size and lighting probably being the two most obvious ones. I'm going to say I can't imagine circumstances in which it would make sense to me to weigh in on more particular elements of design, but I'm pretty sure if I say that, someone will come in here with an application that prompts me to comment in great detail. So maybe that's going to happen from time to time, but generally it doesn't. I listened very carefully to Commissioner Pont's comments, questions, and the answers about the relative size of things with respect to other businesses in the central business district. I weigh that or balance it with some recognition that this building presents to the street and the other views in a way that is unique or nearly unique. So I'm not sure that size on this building means the same thing as it does on other buildings. I'm inclined to think that it does not. I'm inclined to think that and of course we're all subscribing here to the convenient fiction that Main Street runs north and south, but accepting that as our currency, if you will, the north and east facing sides, it seems to me, are clearly the most important, and I'm not sure what that means as a practical matter with a tree obscuring some part of the east facing side. I'm inclined to think that there's less value, significantly less value to the south and westerly exposures. We do drive by them, but I really don't believe they're particularly useful in terms of bringing people to your door. I could be wrong. The building identifiers there make some sense to me. Individual business signage on the scale proposed doesn't trouble me. I'm just not sure that it's really what we should be concerned with as much as we should be concerned with the north and east sides. I do think it makes sense for there to be some limit on luminosity. If we take a stab at it and set it too low, that can be changed. I think it's much more challenging. If we set it too low and the tenants or the building owner come to us and say, wait a minute, our signs aren't visible enough at night, there's a reason for you to come talk to Mr. Heacock and come before us if needed. On the other hand, if we set it too high and find that we're disturbed or we hear comments from others who are disturbed, we don't have a very good process for bringing that back. So I'd rather see us start with a limit than not if the commission has a sentiment about that. And I can tell you all for the moment, that I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Pond on that setting it about halfway seems appropriate and something we can revisit if we need to at the building owner or the tenant's prompting. But that's about as far as I get. I am troubled by the prospect that what we have in front of us isn't an entirely settled or final design, but I think that's really just outside our control. The process for the building owner and the tenants is their process, and one in which the building owner is really in control, since while tenants may be applicants, they're not required to be applicants, and the building owner always is required to sign off on the application. And in generally speaking, in a commercial lease, the landowner is squarely in control of signage before it gets to us. So,
Who's the building owner?
the property owner is identified in our materials as Katie Hortkorn in connection with 1111 Main Street, SHLLC. So strictly speaking, I think it would be the entity that's the property owner. One assumes that Ms. Hortkorn is manager or principal.
She's not here today because she's restricted to staying within 5 miles.
It would be important for you to make remarks at the microphone, and which you're welcome to do if I open the public hearing, but it doesn't work well for our recording process if you just speak from the floor. So, is someone prepared to make a motion, or do we need to carry the conversation out in greater detail? I'm not sure my comments were helpful in that regard, but there you have it.
I would move to continue.
I don't feel I have enough information. I just want to hear from everyone before, that everyone is satisfied with what's being presented before I could have a fully informed vote on it. Or hear from the owner to say that that she's not interested in that at all and wants us to go ahead and vote on this particular.
Is that a second on the continuance or discussion?
Yeah, I like the idea to continue it.
I take it.
I guess, I mean, if I've been, it has been, I know you said this is not our purview, but I have seen many meetings where something is continued based on all the people involved getting together and coming back with something that they agreed upon.
It's not our business to manage that conversation. It is at our discretion whether we act or continue, and in that regard we can sometimes encourage a conversation. So I think I heard a motion. I heard something that sounded like a second. I'm not sure it was announced as such.
I'll second that.
I saw some inclination to request that I reopen the public hearing, so I will do so one last time. It's open.
Thank you, Chairperson Hardy. I just wanted to see if I could maybe verbalize a modified proposal based on the feedback that we've heard that could maybe be voted on in real time, or maybe just get us closer towards what would grant us an approval. I've talked to the folks from Engel and Volkers, and because so much of that east elevation is blocked by the tree and is really limited in terms of visibility, and in my professional design opinion is not a suitable space to have upwards of 4 to 5 different tenants represented in that area. We'd propose eliminating that sign from the application altogether. That would remain Engel and Volkers on the north-facing elevation only. That would keep all tenant-related signage along one facade. To speak real quick on the illumination, we'd be happy with a cap at half of the allowable signage illumination. To speak on size and representation of individual tenants, I agree with the commissioners that it's under the purview of the landlord. I personally was not aware of any discrepancies internally about that. So I apologize that people are going through that issue, but as far as our company's been involved, we weren't aware of that. Signage programs really are usually set and dictated by the property owner for a host of reasons that they usually value things on. In terms of size, Engel and Volkers is a black sign that's going on a very dark gray wall. The stucco color isn't represented here as well as it should be. The stucco color is a charcoal gray. So the contrast of Engel and Volkers against the dark gray stucco is going to be significantly less visible than, say, Crisp and Fit NV, and then the fourth tenant, which is TBD, will be against that stained wood to the right. The letter height of Engel and Volkers is equivalent to that of Crisp. They're both 15 inches high. Crisp happens to have a much thinner weight font style to it, which I'm sure that they could look at modifying if they wanted to, try and increase the impact of it. Additionally, Crisp does have the only signage location where there's white letters that are 6 inches high on top of the bar there that point out what the business actually does in operation as their food concept. So we did attempt from a design perspective to give very equal visual representation to all of the tenants. And I feel like with elimination of the east elevation sign of Engel and Volkers, and the fact that their signage is actually kind of a dark on dark, tone on tone look, which isn't as well represented here as it should be. I think that, visually it's going to be a very evenly weighted program. With those modifications, I would hope that we would be closer to something that would be an approval.
Can I ask you a question?
There's a fine time for questions. It's not really a time for discussion.
Oh, I want to ask a question.
Very good.
What you didn't seem to account for the possibility there'd be a fifth business. So what if a fifth business came in, and is there room for their sign, and do all the signs have to change then?
So as shown in the drawing currently on the screen, there's tenant 5 listed on the far right.
Okay, that's not, yeah.
So as currently, there are only 3 tenants, 2, 3, and 4, that are in that space to the right, and all of their signage will be evenly spaced out to accommodate that.
Yeah, all right.
I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
What would prevent you from painting the building?
I believe changing the exterior of a commercial building would require some sort of design review.
No. So your argument about the low contrast could disappear in
if I had to design signage for every building that could change into any color at any time, I'd have a very difficult job.
I'm just asking what would keep you from painting the building to change your contrast level, and it turns out to be nothing. So I'm not sure your argument about contrast, considering this is a permanent right to have that size of a sign, would be a good one.
Any other questions? Thank you. The public hearing is still open. Thank you.
I would strongly ask that we do move forward with this. Speaking as, to my understanding, the only tenant with approved TI improvements, I would really like to have my sign up when I open for business in the next 8 to 10 weeks. So I would like to ask that we do come to an agreement tonight and can move forward with it.
Thank you. Mr. Densberger?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think the point that Neil made on that east face is a valid point. I think, there isn't a tremendous amount of utility to that. As retailers, we all strive to have more signage. I think we all understand that. As far as the sign scale, and maybe this might be a question for you, Aaron, but when I was out there today and just sort of looking at it from Main Street, when I was looking at the scale of the Sunshine and the Wells Fargo stacked and their illumination, and Joel Gott's sign, Joel's right on the street, and I wonder if in the sign code that we allow for the difference of 15-inch letters right at the street front of Main Street versus, where we are, where Sunshine is, where we're 150 feet inboard from there. I mean, the idea of signage is to be able to adequately recognize that we're open for business.
There's no perspective accounting
Okay.
in the ordinance. That would confound us all if we had to do that math.
And I agree with that, but I think the perspective is that not all things are equal. 15 inches right at the street level versus 15 inches 150 feet away.
Point.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think we've acknowledged it, and it's something I'm certainly considering. No one else, I will close the public hearing. I'm in love with my gavel. This is a known problem. So I got really nervous one night when I couldn't find it. It was a sign. It was a sign. I have a gavel problem.
Where was it?
It was underneath the paper or something. It just made me nervous. So
Well,
we have a motion and a second,
Yes.
and
Can't-
I chose to interrupt our discussion in order to reopen the public hearing and give everyone a chance, one last chance to speak.
I'm just curious what the owner of the property, since I hear that's the bottom line here, what the owner of the property thinks about this and what she would think having heard this public hearing. And I feel ill-informed in not knowing that.
So that's a point in emphasis with respect to the motion and the second
To
that's on the
continue,
floor.
Yes.
Yes.
I appreciate the offer to turn down the lights.
Yeah.
I appreciate the offer to eliminate one of the signs. But we still have the issue of the 200 square foot plus signs. And I really do think that's an issue. Because since each one of these is a one of, frankly, if we establish a precedent of saying, yes, 100 square foot signs, come on down, I'm sorry, that's overkill. And if we do agree to that, that is a precedent. I know it's not a legally binding one, but it's hard to tell one building owner yes, one building owner no. I mean,
Not without a standard, but
I would hate to see every building owner on Main Street now saying, where is my 100 square foot sign?
understood.
And I don't see any good way to say no.
Well, we could do that with reference to the distance from Main Street. I mean,
And-
there is a way to qualify it that is definable if that's where we want to go, and I think that would work.
And if that is where we want to go, we have to know where we're going rather than just driving down the road and saying we'll get where we want to go eventually.
Oh, understood.
And this is, if we do this
Understood.
now, this is without any other planning whatsoever.
Well, we could make a finding tonight that would serve to introduce, for better or worse, depth perception into our sign size review.
And I'm not
Um, But
Still, this is not talking about the signs on the front. This is the sign on the south elevation and the west elevation. Those are the ones that are the 100 square foot plus.
I know.
And
Is it possible to, I mean, there seems to be one sign in question as to,
the size is the problem.
right, the size that is the angles and fulcrum, is that correct?
Size is the problem.
Are the other signs an issue for you?
The other signs are, I mean, the ones for the tenants that occupy less space at a max of about 12 square feet, I really don't have a large problem with that.
Because I'm one of those people.
The 25 square foot sign, yeah, a little bit, but okay. I understand the argument that we're well off the street and we need the additional availability, although I don't think you'll find much foot traffic coming into a real estate agent's shop. Oh, we were driving down Main Street and saw a real estate agent. I think that's unlikely.
Well, is there a way to
you know, with turning down the light, eliminating one of the signs, but we still have the two very, very large signs.
So is there any
larger
way,
than anybody else in town.
is there any way to go forward with the signs that are not, you know, too large in your mind? I'm asking the chair, is that possible to, because you know, some people would
Bifurcate
like to be
this?
able to move forward, and if that's going to hold up everybody, is there any way to bifurcate it, or, you know, to let part of it go forward while the other
we
part?
certainly have the discretion to decide which of these signs we wish to approve, whether that's all of them or just some of them. There's no question about that.
Okay.
I'm feeling much better because I believe Mr. Heacock nodded his head.
Okay, so maybe that would be a
That's
a
an
possible
option.
way to go. Yes, an option.
That's an option.
That would meet the needs of some of the people who are not in dispute here. Yeah.
I really remain worried about crossing this Rubicon. Because once you do it, once you approve a 100 square foot sign, pulling back on that is going to be
Well, unless
extremely
I'm very
difficult.
much misunderstanding Ms. Manette, she was suggesting that we do not.
We do not, that we bifurcate this.
Right.
I'd
So
be
you don't have a problem with bifurcation?
No.
Okay, and then you don't need to tell us again that you have a problem with the large signs.
Seemingly I do.
Well, not based on the last comment I heard. So, Mr. Hale.
I would first just kind of applaud the agility of the applicant in sort of being pretty quick on their feet and addressing some of these issues. And I think, you know, eliminating the side, or actually the Main Street facing one, I think addresses some of the other in-tenant issues too. And I think you've made a much better case about kind of the egalitarian notion on kind of tenant piece. And I think as to the dark brown charcoal stucco point, I think is actually very important. Would have been a good one to lead with, but now we have that information and understanding kind of the resources that go into to this refacing and that hard trowel cement stucco is not something anybody relishes the idea of painting over, having put those resources to that. So I think there's built in, I mean, to address some of your concerns.
Stucco house that I've repainted, so I know what goes into it.
Well, no, this is integral color stucco.
It's integral color stucco that I have painted down.
Right, you chose to do that, but somebody who just put the resources into this hard trowel stucco is very unlikely to do that.
And I would agree, but it's a
right, but I don't think we can guard against every chance thing that could go wrong. I think on Lester's point of kind of embracing and encouraging and being a team member toward cheering the success of these businesses, I think there is value in us kind of approving what we can so that these businesses can move forward and actually do business.
I know that's exactly where we were.
Yeah. I am pro bifurcation.
Good. We're making progress.
With that in mind,
I think I can count up to 3 that way. So is there a new motion?
Well, first we have to withdraw this one.
It's good I have a parliamentarian at my
Gotta
side.
withdraw what we've got.
I was going to skip right over that.
I would move to withdraw.
Would the author of the motion
I would move to withdraw my motion.
Very good.
If I get concurrence from the second. And replace it, if you will, in whole, with a motion that would approve the signage as modified on, that would be the east elevation, right, and the north elevation. In other words, eliminating the Engel and Volker sign on the east elevation, reducing the maximum allowable lighting by half. Otherwise, that's it.
Well, is there a second for that motion?
Does that include all of the signs?
You didn't bifurcate.
Did you? Well, yes, but I only suggested the ones on the east and north.
He's moving approval of just
We're truly bifurcating.
Yes, yes, because I thought I literally proposed east and north.
Okay, so I have a motion for approval on the east and north signage.
As modified. Yes.
Second.
As modified. I hear a second.
That doesn't address the size of the Engel and Volker sign still on the north face.
No, it's still 25 square feet,
The motion is to approve it at 25 square feet.
or whatever it is as drawn.
And I'm not closing the discussion. We're just at the point where we have a motion and a second.
Will we have another motion?
Your microphone, Commissioner Monette.
Will we have another motion specifically saying which?
I will insist on one.
Okay. So this is the first of at least 2. Okay.
Now wait a minute. Under our existing rubric, we can actually have more than one motion on the floor at the same time?
No. After we're done with
I'm not
this
so
motion.
sure how that reads, but yeah.
Well, I improvise. What can I tell you? No, there is
under
a
what I'm
motion and a
suggesting, that
second.
Engel
I'm
and
not
Volker
asking-
sign would remain the size that it's shown. I realize that's the largest sign on the building by far.
Okay, that's clear. Commissioner Hale seconded Commissioner Ponce's motion. I will ask for a motion with respect to the remaining signage before we go home. Is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Ms. Gamero.
Chair Hardy, to clarify for the record, can you please confirm that the first motion was to withdraw the original motion by Commissioner or Vice Chair Pont, seconded?
Well, no, that was the second motion. There was a motion. Then the second motion was to withdraw the first motion,
Correct.
and then we got to the third motion.
And I think we can withdraw without voting on a withdrawal if it's withdrawn by the person who made the motion.
Don't we have to vote on the withdrawal motion?
I don't think so,
No,
because
okay.
the individual
Because
that
we
made
both
the
did it.
motion withdrew
Both
it.
the moving
If somebody else
Commissioner and the
tried to,
second
if, for example,
commissioner.
if you tried to,
Okay.
Commissioner Ponce, correct.
So motion to approve the signage as modified?
on the east, on the west elevation, on the east elevation, which now is no signage, and on the north elevation, which is reduced lighting and no signage on the east elevation.
Okay, correct. Vice Chair Pont?
Yes.
Commissioner Hale?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
No.
Commissioner Monette?
I don't understand. All right, yes. I mean, this is okay. This is approving the voluntary changes that were made
yes.
by the architect involved. Okay, yes. Okay.
And Chair Hardy?
Yes. So
Yeah.
let's go to the remaining two sides of the building, please.
Two choices on this one. A straight out move to deny or a move to extend. I'll
I
go.
see another option.
I'll go with you won't. You can try that.
Well,
I
I'm
will-
gonna
I
put it
will-
out there. Okay.
I will move to extend, since we bifurcated this, on the signage.
By which you mean a continuance.
Continuance, yes.
Okay.
On the west elevation and south elevation. Unless you want to divide it one more time.
Is there a second? Yes?
Did what we just vote on enable the two other businesses to go forward with their signs?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it did.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is doing the west side, which is on
The back.
on Oak Street.
This will be
Mitchell.
this is the back.
West and south.
Well, this is the smaller ID signs next to the door, 6 square feet apiece, and the two 100+ square foot signs on the south
The building
the-
identifiers.
west.
On the south and the west. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And you're asking
The motion is to continue.
Well, I don't know. Hmm?
Well,
I'll
I haven't
second.
heard a second yet, so I'm going to offer my own perspective here, which is we do have the option of simply reducing the size so that the applicant has a choice about whether they wish to come back or appeal or not. I'm not convinced that we need to continue or deny to address Commissioner Pont's concerns.
All right.
In fact, it seems to me since the concern is about size, that's something we can address tonight.
All right. If nobody likes that motion, how about this one? I move that we deny the 1111 main sign of over 100 square feet on both the south and the west elevation, and approve the 6 square foot tenant signs on the south elevation.
Is there a second?
Not going to get one there either.
Doesn't appear so.
I give up, then somebody else do it.
Maybe we just should discuss those two. I mean, the two signs in question. I don't think you have an issue with the little marker signs by the door.
No,
Right.
I just said
Right.
those are, even though those are larger than they should be. Okay.
I mean, what I would suggest is we just talk about these two signs for one more quick round, so we can get some clarity. In my view, those signs are there for building identity, building branding, rebranding that building. I think to call them 100 square foot signs is truly incorrect. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think it reflects what those signs do. Those signs are sort of architectural graphics that are meant to sort of spiff up what is a backside of a block building and give it some interest without being totally grandstanding. It's a in my view, it's a quiet attempt at rebranding and to uplift, in a very holistic fashion that building. They could have ignored the back of that building, but they put some resources into it. They've made it much more attractive because the back of that building was very clearly the back. you know, and I think I would move. I don't have any issue with that sign. I would move that we approve it.
Are you moving that we approve it?
I am moving that we approve it.
Is there a second?
You want to go for that? I'll second it.
Why'd you go for the bifurcation? That's crazy.
Well, because I just wanted to know if that could happen, but I didn't realize that the 100-foot signs were these, because I don't have issue with 4 ones either. I mean, I you know, I hear that you do, but yeah, yeah. Anyway, well, let's see if we can get a vote.
Any other discussion?
Well, maybe, do you think it'd be totally out of order to ask if the applicant would agree to reduce those signs somewhat, not to 50%, but to 75% of them? I don't know.
Well, that's a strange thing to do after you've seconded the motion.
Well, I know it. It's because I don't know how to think. I'm just learning.
You know, if the motion fails on the roll call, then the door is open.
All right.
And I don't know, does she have to vote for the motion when she's seconded it?
Commissioner Monet?
I think that's a choice, is it not?
She seconded the motion, correct?
Yes.
That doesn't mean I have to vote for it, is it?
If you second the motion, you vote for the motion.
Oh, okay.
correct?
So I can't change my mind after I do that.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I suppose you could, but
It would be odd, but
Well, what else?
possibly even in these small circles unprecedented, but
Could, as an option, could we withdraw that motion and
Only if he's.
well,
Oh, I can remove my second? So that we would have, if I remove my second, would we have a chance to ask the architect if he would be willing to modify the size of that sign, not to what,
speak to the microphone, please.
not to what's been, not to 50, but maybe somewhere in between what
Ms. Manette,
Commissioner Pont wanted. And
you should either withdraw the second or not. If you withdraw it, we can go on. But right now, with a motion and a second, we're more or less stuck with me trying to decide when to ask for the roll call.
well, go ahead and ask for the roll call.
Ms. Camaro?
Commissioner Hale,
yes.
Commissioner Monet,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
No.
Vice Chair Pont,
No.
and Chair Hardy?
No.
Okay, good.
Okay, so I think now we might be able to entertain a motion regarding the size of the building identifiers on the south and west facing sides. And while we're at it, I think we can take care of the 6-foot signs as well. And I would hope that we could get this done with one more motion. I would exhort the moving party to make that possible.
The building ID signs on the north and east sides are 11.66 square feet. So, it would seem, since I failed to get a second on removing them entirely, putting the east and south at, the south and west, right? At 11.66 square feet would be appropriate.
From 100 square feet to 11.6.
The same size as the building ID signs that are visible from Main Street. They would be the same size. If you look at the design now, they have
But would
two
it
building
be-
ID signs.
Would it be perhaps more clear if they were the same size and design?
That would certainly add clarity to it. And if you're talking about branding a building, it seems to me consistency of design is also important.
Well, I don't,
Oops, microphone, are you on?
If you look at page 2,
I'm just trying to get some
If
clarity
if
here
I
for
could jump in, I mean,
Of
the
course.
1111 main and the graphic on the one on the corner and the one in the back is the very same. The only difference and the only piece that's throwing it into 100 square foot by your calculation is the arc, the circle.
and frankly, Dan, that's part of the sign. When you look at something like that, Gestalt psychology says you see the Gestalt, you see the entire structure, not part of it.
John,
So that's just how
I
people
don't
think.
I don't think that this body has the bona fides to weigh in on design and graphics or even marketing. You know, I think the professionals that put this together did so with purpose. I think we can appreciate and point out that the 1111 main graphic is the same on both. The difference, and we have a difference of opinion in that the arc counts as sign. I find that as a kind of a flourish that is really just meant to sort of express some exuberance in the rebranding. I think to call that and have this fall on its face because of that arc is, we can agree to disagree, but I disagree.
Well, it's not just the arc. The other two signs that are painted on, the 1111 main is much, much larger. I mean, look at the graphic on page 8.
Right. No, I'm perfectly able to read the graphics here, and we are perfectly allowed to disagree. But I don't see what we accomplish by kind of capriciously coming in here and saying, well, let's say do this at 65%. What have we accomplished there? I don't look at that as a win. I think, what we have here is a really very holistically approached package, that these folks put a lot of thought into, and a lot of different dynamics went into these decisions. And I think we can't underestimate the value of the rebranding piece of this building. And I applaud that they're kind of flying it proud that they put a stamp on this building. I think it's going to add. I think it adds to my rounding that bend from Oak to and approaching Main Street. I think it enhances my experience there.
I would respectfully disagree that this has been looked at holistically. The designer stood up and I asked him, did you design according to what's in downtown? And the answer was basically no. So holistically, not. This building, perhaps.
Well, I would be more upset about it if it were a sign for a business, but it's an address, and I think that's, and I don't see if what the problem is.
In this case, with respect to the signs we're discussing, the address is the business.
Well, it's the building, but it's not a particular business. It's the building.
It's the landlord's business.
Well, sure.
Which is
and,
renting out that
the
space.
Cameo Theater has a big sign. I don't know. I don't have a problem with that at that
back.
location. That's not the Main Street location.
Well, I think Commissioner Pont is right that if we don't have an articulable standard by which we make a distinction about size, if we approve a significantly larger sign than we've ever approved before without some articulable standard about why that isn't going to be a fine size anywhere and everywhere, that we're going to see applications for very large signs that we really don't like. And all at once, we're going to be in a position where, at the end of the day, we're saying, okay, we'll approve this because we like the way it looks, but we won't approve that because we don't. That's not a good place for us to end up.
But my thinking is, since the Main Street is really in need of help to have flourishing businesses, perhaps some changes are necessary. And to go by what you just said, you know, in a very rigid manner, would preclude any changes. This might be a great idea to put addresses really big on the building.
I don't have any argument that some changes are necessary. We've already made some changes to the ordinance for Main Street. What we're discussing tonight is driven by changes to the sign ordinance. But, you know, I want to reiterate what the chairman said, that without knowing where you're going, you don't know where you're going to end up.
Well, we
and
never
just
know where
saying,
we're
we'll
going.
approve this one, then what about the one after that, and
Maybe
the one after
so.
that,
I mean,
and the one after that?
we never know where we're going, and we never know where we're going to end up. I just think that
That's what a set of standards is for.
I understand. In that case, then anything that doesn't already exist on Main Street shouldn't change. And I don't think that's where we want to be either. You know, and I totally understand where I understand, but I think it's complicated and tricky. And sometimes this seems so unoffensive to me. It's not offensive to me. I mean, maybe it's offensive to you. And, you know, the next planning commissioners, you know, might find certain things offensive.
Let me give you an example I could see approaching us like a freight train. You know, the bulk of the Goodman building still is not leased out to anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Goodman building is the largest building on Main Street.
If
They
wanna
could
put
come
their-
in and say, hey, guess what? I'll move in. Give me a 200 square foot sign.
Well, I'm talking about an address. And you're saying it's an address, but it's the name of the building. Fine, have it be the name of the building. It's not appropriate where Goodman's is located. It seems much more appropriate here. I think the location has something to do with it as well.
And if you believe it's more appropriate, we should have standards that identify where it's appropriate before
Those
we
will be
approve such a
developed as
massive
each-
change.
I think those are developed as each application comes before us. That's how the standards are developed. You can't set the standards all for the future. It's an organic thing. It changes. It's evolution. So this is maybe part of an evolution that's going to, I don't know, but in this particular case, it doesn't seem to me to be offensive. On that matter, though, was the letter that we received, is that supposed to be read into the record or is not? Because, I mean, I hate to bring that up now. Maybe I should have asked you afterwards. But these people were offended, so yes, I know it. So anyway, I can support this totally at this point.
If I'm going to say anything about the letter at all, I should say it before we finalize an action here, because I can tell you I'm going to be banging the gavel really fast when we get done with this one. We'll be marching right through the rest of the agenda. So I had meant to say something earlier. I'm just going to say I'm troubled by the anonymous nature of the letter. I'm not, I don't really find anonymity compatible with my ideas about public participation. I mean, the comments are what they are. I hope that the author or authors of the letter will choose in the future to make themselves known to us by signing the letter or by coming forward at the meeting. It is a part of the record, having been submitted in writing, and we do not there's no requirement that we read everything just because it comes in late. We need to acknowledge late submittals because they aren't part of what's available to those who go to the city website or look at the agenda and so on. So this is a letter signed by concerned citizens who are also small business advocates and remain optimistic about the future potential of our community of St. Helena, otherwise unidentified. I'm going to be honest. I didn't have much to eat before this meeting, so I'm running out of gas here, people. And I don't think I'm the only one. So I believe I heard a motion. No, that didn't get a second. So
So can I make a motion to continue?
Can I gazump you there, just since you've
Be my guest.
full of emotion here. There's really nothing I hate worse than kind of redesigning somebody's project. But I'm also really conscious of the kind of expediency of these things and what I view as our duty to kind of get these things back out to you so you guys can do business. The only really quick suggestion I might have, just to get a quick idea if this would even make sense and be approved, if you left the 1111 main graphic and take the arc off, all of a sudden your math goes down by probably 75%. Oh no, yes.
I think that's
it
a great
does.
idea.
Because I feel like the branding of the building is vitally important. And I'm obviously comfortable with the arc, but if you take the arc off, your math goes way down.
I think that's a great idea.
Commissioner Anderson.
But I believe it would still accomplish what you folks should want to do.
I don't mind the arc either way.
What'd you say?
I don't mind the arc either way. I don't mind the sign on the south side. I would be horrified to see a sign that size on most buildings in town. So I do understand Commissioner Ponce's concerns there. My main concern is the 1111 Main Street sign on the west side because it faces residential. And if it were me, I would not want to look out my window and see 100 square foot, 50 square foot, whatever sign.
Yeah. It's like a billboard.
Well, I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So that's the one on Oak.
Commissioner Manette,
Yes.
help me out here.
Well,
Give us some
so
direction.
is this the sign? It's on Oak. Is this the one facing Oak? Is this?
There's one on Mitchell and one on Oak.
Okay, so
West faces Oak, yes.
okay, so that's the one that you're concerned with, the residents. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one on the other side is I don't mind it either, but it still could drop the arc maybe.
So you agree with Commissioner Anderson? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think I hadn't thought of it, but I do think that's
Think fast.
Important.
I'm running out of steam here.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, we could thank you. We could make a motion that everything else goes forward except for that sign, except for the approval of that sign, and we can revisit that? Is that what you mean? How would that be for you?
I motion to approve the west and south sign, or the south-facing sign without the arc, and no sign on the west side.
What about the tenants signs on the west side?
Totally fine with the tenant signs.
Okay.
Second.
Does everyone understand the motion?
At this
Did
point,
I just
are you
hear a
kidding?
second?
I seconded. The bobbleheads are sticking together.
Ms. Gamero?
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Hale?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pont?
No.
Chair Hardy?
Yes.
Is everybody happy or is everybody unhappy? No.
Okay, I'm going back to my agenda. Where am I? Department reports. Are there any department reports?
Absolutely not.
Okay, the agenda forecast is online. This meeting is adjourned.